thank you all for being here. Welcome to A Core for the Future, Models and Perspectives from Across U.S. Jesuit Higher Education. I'm Jim McCartan of Fordham University's Theology Department. I'm the chair of the National Seminar on Jesuit Higher Education, which publishes Conversations on Jesuit Higher Education, today's sponsor. Before we begin, I want to invite audience members to share your questions at any time in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Panelists will have a chance to address them later in the program. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you my colleague and today's moderator, Chris Dietrich, Associate Professor of History and Director of American Studies at Fordham University. A graduate of Grinnell College and the University of Texas and a former Peace Corps volunteer, Chris is the author or editor of 3 volumes on U.S. foreign relations and political economy, as well as an editor of the Power, Politics, and the World series at the University of Pennsylvania Press. He also, for our purposes today, serves as chair of the Core Curriculum Committee at Fordham. So Chris, it's off to you to get things rolling. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And thanks so much for your service chairing the seminar on Jesuit Higher Education. And thanks to Conversations on Jesuit Higher Education for sponsoring this opportunity to think about the core curriculum, right? Everybody here loves the core. They love to hate the core. They love to argue about the core. And I think that this mini splendored devotion exists because it gets to some of the thorniest questions that sit at the nexus of our intellectual and our professional lives. This landscape of contemporary higher education and interdisciplinarity, international education, diversity, ethical imperatives, moral development, right? And the list could go on and on. Questions that we and our undergraduates face together in times that feel shaky, right? To say the least. So some animating questions for today. How can a core prepare undergraduates for a meaningful life, for a purposeful life of contemplative action in an unknown future? What about the past? Past cores, right? But also a more nuanced understanding of the history of the United States and the world. What about the past can help us better understand the present and the future of core curricula? How can a core curriculum foster agency, insight, and confidence in our students? In short, how can we create academic structures that help our students find authenticity and ambiguity in their own and others' voices? So to dig into these and more specific questions, we have an extraordinary set of panelists, and it's an honor to share the room with them and to introduce them. Ellen Crowell from St. Louis University is the director of the University Core, where she is also an associate professor of English and Women's and Gender Studies. As the director of the Core, she oversaw the creation of that university's first ever common undergraduate general education curriculum, which was developed in between 2018 and 2020, and is launching in the fall of 2022. Welcome to Michelle Maldonado of the University of Scranton. Dr. Michelle Maldonado is the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Scranton. Prior to her arrival there, she was Professor of Religious Studies, Assistant Provost of Undergraduate Education, and Executive Director of the Office of Academic Enhancement at the University of Miami, where she developed and supported academic initiatives for historically underrepresented and first-generation students. Her research and teaching interests include Latino and Latina, Latin American and feminist theologies, as well as interdisciplinary work in Afro-Caribbean studies. Next up, we'll have Ethan Baxter, professor and chair of Earth and Environmental Sciences at Boston College. By studying a vast geological record, Professor Baxter interprets the chemistry of diverse Earth materials, rocks, minerals, sediments, and more, to elucidate the timescales, rates, and mechanisms of broad and interdependent geological processes. He's been engaged in teaching the science of Earth to students from K to 12 to undergraduate to the graduate level throughout his 20 years as a professor. Finally, we have Molly Kretschmar Hendrix, professor of psychology at Gonzaga University, an undergraduate alumna of Loyola Marymount University, and a current participant in the Ignatian Colleagues Program, a specialist in child development and family relationships, an award-winning teacher, and a campus leader in community engaged learning. She served until recently as the director of Gonzaga's University Core and had a leading role in its revision in 2016. At this point, I'll turn it over to Professor Ellen Crowell of St. Louis University. Ellen, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here. Thank you so much, Christopher, for that introduction of all of us. And I'm very excited to hear what everybody has to say about their various efforts on behalf of reinvigorating the core for the 21st century. So Christopher mentioned that my name is Ellen Crowell, and I am the director of St. Louis University's first common undergraduate core. From our establishment in 1818 through this year, we've never had one core curricula for all undergraduate students. And this created problems for students transferring between majors, and we know students do a lot of that. It also created a major problem for assessment of general education, so that was another reason that we underwent this process. But I think most importantly, we were missing out on an opportunity to talk with our students, to talk with new and continuing faculty, and to talk with our staff about what makes the undergraduate experience at St. Louis University in particular, and Jesuit institutions more generally, distinctive and transformative. So I am going to briefly share some of the guiding principles and challenges that informed our process at SLU, and that I believe speak to the value and importance of Jesuit core curricula today. I have a few slides, so I'll be kind of going between talking to you and sharing slides. So undergraduate students today, and for many years, have come to our colleges and universities having already completed or looking to complete while they are with us what they see as core requirements elsewhere. So they might try to complete some core requirements in high school or through AP credit, or in the summers at local community colleges while they are attending our institutions. And that makes a lot of sense financially and also in terms of time to degree for those students. Relatedly, they increasingly come to us already declared in majors that they understand as leading to clear career paths. And this is where I'm going to share one screen with you. So they come to us often in majors that they understand as leading to clear career paths. And often these paths are in STEM fields with high credit hour majors and external accreditation requirements. And this image that you're seeing here is what we look like at SLU today. The dark blue is programmatic requirements, and the lighter colors across the bottom are the cores. So you can see in the very first left-hand column, that's the College of Arts and Sciences, where the core is significantly larger than the average number of credit hours in a major or program. But you can look all the way to the right-hand side and see, for instance, Parks is our College of Engineering, and you can see the dark blue representing total numbers in a program and the lighter color representing their general education footprint. One reason students feel siloed in their major units is that faculty also feel siloed. Many units focus only on major programs of study or on providing service courses for other majors like calculus, and don't think very much about the core, either on its own or related to their programs. And the image that I just showed you suggests the extent to which those programs with those high credit hour to degree requirements for their students can really only focus on their programmatic requirements. Other programs in our university see their existence as entirely bound up in the core, but in ways that encourage territoriality rather than collaboration. For both students and faculty alike, a core curriculum needs to be first presented as a whole experience. A clearly defined, holistic, and from our experience, an outcomes-based core offers students otherwise siloed in their departments a way to see each other across requirements as all working, albeit in different ways, towards the completion of a general education experience connected to the mission and identity of their institution. And because such a core asks everyone to carry the mission, faculty members and departments unused to seeing themselves in the liberal education mission of our institutions are asked to step in and align with graduation level outcomes. So just to say a little bit more about a scaffolded curriculum, one where a learning outcome is met more than once over a sequence of courses, a scaffolded curriculum lends creativity and intellectual flexibility, especially in core curricula that actively strive to guide students in integrating knowledge from their core and their major. In many packed programs, what this means practically is that with a scaffolded core curriculum, departments will modify existing major requirements such that they overlap with core requirements, not to push students into a fifth year. For instance, an engineering design class might count for a third communication course in the core, or an occupation therapy course might count for one of a student's social justice requirements. Such an approach expands a student's network of instructors, allowing for more mentoring possibilities when a student needs to think about changing majors. And when faculty across our institutions speak with a common language about our shared commitments and priorities, students are more powerfully brought into the fabric of the whole, which increases their sense of wellness and well-being and allows us to truly care for the whole person. When a core is constructed on outcomes and not discrete courses, and when outcomes are scaffolded throughout the core, our bedrock institutional values become more powerful and persuasive through repetition. Because they have a choice in how they encounter and navigate a curriculum, students are invited to encounter again and again and in multiple disciplinary languages our shared commitments to experiencing, reflecting on, and acting in the world for the good of others and for our planet. As a result, our shared institutional message accumulates, and it takes on shape and life for our students over time. We make a compelling and timely case for our core curricula by placing our core at the core of who we are and what we believe. So this idea of allowing our institutional message to accumulate and take shape and life for our students over time allows us to make this case. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Michelle Maldonado. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So, diversity and the way we speak about it these days has defined my intellectual, personal, and spiritual journey. For me, it is not a choice. As a Cuban American woman in higher education, this is the reality of the spaces I inhabit, particularly since I've entered into administration. But today our topic is curriculum, and I would like to spend my time with you today exploring how efforts to diversify our curriculum can sometimes be misguided and too often result in a construction of the contributions of historically underrepresented peoples as tangential side projects to the academic canons of our discipline. Now, I realize your universities may not all use diversity, but I'm referring to those, mine does, but I'm referring to those courses that are grouped together under the headings of, I've seen social justice, I've seen difference, I've seen diversity, and I've seen a combination of those and other similar categories. So I understand the need for diversity requirements, but I wish we did not have them. What I hope to show you today in my 6 minutes or so is that many of these requirements are really a Band-Aid that confirm a West and the rest model of intellectual and disciplinary authority. The very existence of diversity requirements in a core curriculum implies that either A, we do not either trust our colleagues to present a broad and complex understanding of their disciplines that represents the diverse geographic, racial, and cultural realities of the world we're living in today and historically. B, have not intentionally hired faculty or offered opportunities for them to broaden their teaching portfolio, if they desire, to teach about those realities. Or C, we don't think these issues are important enough to infuse our curriculums, instead relegating them to 1 to 3 courses, which are defined by their attentiveness to diversity. And then those courses are not presented as core courses in academic departments and disciplines. In many ways, this was my training as a systematic theologian, both as an undergraduate and graduate student. At Georgetown, I did my undergraduate degree, I only encountered the voices of historically underrepresented populations in my feminist and Black theology courses. Both at Union Theological Seminary and the Graduate Theological Union, in our survey courses, we would sometimes spend 2 weeks on a major European theologian. And then we would have what I called Brown Day, where you would cover literally all historically underrepresented groups. Now, I do not regret the 2 weeks I spent reading Karl Rahner. I do regret that I read Black, Latino, Latina, Asian American, and Native American theologians all in 1 week. The messaging was clear about whose voices I needed to know in order to be a trained systematic theologian. And yet, if I'm being honest, the time that I spent with the Karl Rahners, Karl Barths, Paul Tillix, and Hans Urs von Balthasars in my graduate work, those were my diversity courses, right, as a Cuban American. And here, what I want to flag is what's important is not only how we represent diversity in our curriculums, but also how we present the need for it. The claim that we need diversity requirements in order to teach our students about racism and ethnic prejudice implies an exclusively white student body. It constructs diversity from a white gaze. Trust me, I did not have to wait for college to experience institutional racism. However, my undergraduate courses did provide me the language and the theoretical framework to address it. I did not need to read Cristina Garcia in order to understand the Cuban American experience, but I did need a course on Latina literature to expose me to her existence. In that vein, in any moment of discussing issues of cultural, racial, and ethnic diversity, we must not reduce our students, our historically underrepresented students, to experts on race in the classroom. It is not their job to educate white students, and sometimes even their professors, on racism. They also should not be pressured or forced to reveal their own personal experiences for classroom consumption. It is a fine line here, I realize, but a significant one for us to maintain. So, in my ideal world, diversity requirements would not exist because we would not need them. We would teach our students about intellectual complexity, both in the Americas and globally. Again, to defer to my own discipline, I cannot imagine teaching a course on contemporary Catholicism that does not engage the Catholic intellectual tradition of Latin America and of Latinos and Latinas, given the demographics of the contemporary church. I do not understand how one can teach the Reformation while ignoring the transatlantic slave trade in the Americas, as if they were not occurring simultaneously. And while I know in most theology courses, students often do not encounter a theological writing by a Latin American before reading Gustavo Gutierrez's writings from the late 1960s, I fantasize about a historical theology curriculum, which includes the writings of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, a 16th century Mexican nun who I've argued in my own research is a Latin American church mother. So this work is hard. It is complicated and involves not only the construction of curriculum, but also the learning outcomes of departments, pedagogy, and I would argue a particular responsibility and accountability for any faculty member teaching a core curriculum course. Because I do strongly believe that you have a distinctive task when you teach in the core that is not the same as teaching, for an example, an upper level departmental course. These designations mean something. I know people will say it is too much. It is teaching out of their field and they cannot do it. I frankly disagree. I went to graduate school to research the religion of Latin American and Caribbean peoples and their descendants in the United States. I am not only a better scholar, but a better teacher because I read the European and Euro-American theologians that dominated my education and field. And I would end on that note. The diversity requirement is not just for our students, it's for us too. We should all be called to have a more global, more diverse, and more just understanding of our disciplines. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Next up, we have Ethan Baxter from Boston College.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris, for the introduction. Thanks to everybody for participating here. So my role in the panel was to comment on the opportunities and the challenges for how to better integrate the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, in a core curriculum. As a scientist myself, I'm certainly passionate about this. And I would say that bringing that passion and bringing that engagement to students in the sciences and that relevance to students' lives is what the core can provide. One opinion that I would share right off the bat is I often hear in conversations around campus and more outside of campus is that there's the liberal arts and then there's STEM, as if they're somehow two different entities. And I think in my view, the spirit of the core is quite explicitly to break down any notion that the liberal arts and the sciences are somehow different. And I'd like to provide some perspective on how the STEM fields, the sciences, are part of the liberal arts, are intimately connected to it in some meaningful ways. And I think that by illuminating those ways, we can start to illuminate connections that bring relevance to undergraduates and to any students that experience what we're talking about. One comment that I think Ellen might have made leading off her remarks, that many students are coming into university having already chosen a major or declared a major. One of the interesting things, sometimes frustrating, but also opportunistic things about the earth and environmental sciences, very few students come in to college declaring that particular field. The reason is because many high schools don't provide that background, that content, that awareness of what the earth and environmental sciences can bring. And that's fascinating because the earth and environmental sciences, in my terribly biased opinion, represent a wonderful opportunity for drawing those connections, for bringing that relevance, for creating that passion. Earth and environmental sciences is interrogating and addressing some of the most important and pressing challenges that society faces today: climate change, resource depletion, availability of water and food for a growing population. And we also address some of the most fundamental questions of eternity, the age of the earth, the origin of the earth, the origin of life itself. These are some of the great questions that we can all interrogate. At BC a few years ago, we renewed the core through a process creatively called core renewal. And that included a real strong emphasis in different types of courses that brought together faculty from completely different disciplines into conversation together, either in the same classroom simultaneously with a large group of students in a course construct called complex problems, or in two separate classes, but with the same students on the same topic in a course construct called enduring questions. I was involved in an enduring questions class paired with a theologian, and we were addressing the questions of the origin and evolution of the earth and the building of a habitable planet. These courses bring students together into common conversation on central questions that bring the STEM fields with the other humanities. So we've had courses that paired earth and environmental sciences with history, with art, with theology, sociology, philosophy, English. And I think, again, many of the topics that we care about are very naturally integrative with some of those different areas. I should also say, through our work in the core curriculum at BC, and I'm sure in all the other institutions on the call, we're interested in bringing this spirit and philosophy of integrating from the core to the humanities beyond just the core, but into all of our teaching. And so I think when I think about the kind of students that we're creating and the character of those students, earth and environmental sciences majors, their ability to succeed in making a difference on the earth and communicating their science in relevant ways is going to be predicated in large part on their ability to understand and communicate that relevance to broader society. So just to offer a few final comments, I think one of the great challenges in STEM education. If I look back at my own undergraduate and graduate education and many of the courses that are still being taught, I can critique my own courses as well. I think too often the STEM fields, especially at the introductory level, can get mired in definitions, terminology, categorizations, and that does little to bring in that engagement from students that might not already be inspired and passionate. So three mechanisms that I've been using in my courses and I found effective in reframing the STEM in the core curriculum to bring in student engagement and interest and passion and curiosity are storytelling. I've used stories about the science of the earth as a mechanism to generate that interest, to communicate things in ways that for many students is in a more familiar package than those definitions and terminologies. I've brought number 2, music into my classes. I think music is a wonderful way to bring people together. Everybody knows something about music and can appreciate something about music. But in the sciences, what I try to show is that music is also a science. It's physics. And you have to understand those vibrating sound waves at different frequencies to understand those notes before you can assemble a chord, which sounds a little bit more special, before you can start to write that symphony and tell that story in a more sophisticated way. Now we understand why it's important to understand the physics of that sound wave, the simple chords, before we can write and interpret that symphony. And finally, I've been very intentional about bringing the concept of love into my classwork and really defining the enterprise of science as another way of seeking to find love in all things. So I have a YouTube video series called Every Rock Has a Story. That's for elementary school children. You can find it online. But that's a theme that I think brings all of this together to my undergraduates as well. When you can start with something as simple as a rock, just a rock. And if you learn how to see, and if you learn how to find God's love in something even as simple as a rock, that can be transcendent in understanding what it matters and how it matters to people in society. And I can expand upon that if we have time at Q&A. So thank you. Those are my remarks for now.
Thank you so much, Ethan. And last but not least, we have Professor Molly Kretschmar Hendrix. Molly, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. It's been a while, thankfully, since I've taught on Zoom. So I'm learning and needing to re-navigate how to do a shared screen and get my comments. So first of all, thank you so much to Jim for organizing this panel on such a vital topic, and for Chris and my co-panelists on sharing some really compelling thoughts and ideas thus far. I was asked to consider questions around what makes a core distinctly Jesuit and Ignatian. I'll sketch out a few thoughts here, and I look forward to hearing from others in the discussion to follow. In Father John OMalley's words, Jesuit education is meant to help the fly to fly out of the bottle. And I'll let you read the rest of his words here. OMalley's framework of Jesuit education, oriented around 5 hooks, also includes heritage and perspective. We are not born for ourselves alone, eloquentia perfecta, and the spirit of finesse, which speaks to our common humanity in all its complexity. In his essay on the 5 traits of a Jesuit education, Father Robert Mitchell emphasizes a person-centered, humanistic, and liberal education with a passion for quality and a preoccupation with questions of ethics, values, and justice, and one that opens the horizon of religious experience and faith development for all students. Father Peter Hans Kolvenbach's historic Santa Clara address places the service of faith and the promotion of justice at the forefront. And in his 2010 address, Father Adolfo Nicolas challenges us to promote in creative new ways the depth of thought and imagination in order to counter what he refers to as the globalization of superficiality. Given these goals and values, how then do we craft a distinctly Jesuit and Ignatian core? The emphasis on outcomes-based curricula that has grown over the past several decades has, I think, helped us. Our work on core revision at Gonzaga began with a deep discussion and reflection grounded in our mission about whom we wanted our students to become. We crafted baccalaureate learning goals from which we developed more specific learning outcomes. Of note, we recently revised our BLGs to be more intentional about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. This is just a brief sketch, and I'd be happy to provide the full text for anyone who is interested. We were very intentional about creating a cohesive and integrated curriculum organized around yearly themes and questions that align with and animate our mission. I'll give you just a moment to read through the overarching question and the yearly themes and questions here in this core graphic. And we wanted to make mission present throughout the core, not just siloed to certain areas. For example, our first year seminar and fourth year core integration seminar both explicitly focus on mission related outcomes. Courses throughout the core develop themes of service, social justice, and global citizenship. I would like to suggest, however, that any Jesuit core is perhaps less about what we teach and more about how we teach it, the intentions and sensibilities we bring. Indeed, Father Howard Gray argues that Jesuit education is soul education. What might soul education look like? Let me offer one example from my recent first year seminar entitled Coming of Age in a Global Context. I had the opportunity to work with a group of students who were all living together in the same dorm, a living and learning community on global citizenship. We began that semester building a community agreement that would allow us to do our best work together. Class discussions, assignments, and reflections carried over into the dorm as close friendships were forged. Toward the end of the semester, we read Tara Westover's book, Educated, and viewed the 2016 Academy Award-winning film, Moonlight. Both are powerful coming-of-age pieces. I asked students to reflect on questions about what it means to be educated and what it means to become one's authentic self. Students were incredibly insightful about who they were becoming. One student in particular revealed his own heart-wrenching truth. He had disclosed to the class earlier in the semester a deeply personal aspect of his identity and shared that growing up in a conservative environment, he had to disguise his authentic self to the degree to which he no longer knew who he was. We held him gently in that sacred moment. Indeed, as a class, we created the kind of environment that supports our fundamental human need to be seen, heard, understood, held, and valued. The kind of environment that communicates infinite worth. A Jesuit and Ignatian education animated by the core curriculum is many things. It's about academic excellence and developing creative imaginations. It's about expanding worldviews and opening the horizon for spiritual development. It's about cura personalis and developing people for and with others. It's about the whole person. At its heart, it's soul education. As Father Gray says, the Ignatian instinct is to help people become fully alive, as fully present to their humanity as possible. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much for that thoughtful reflection, Molly. So now we're turning to the question and answer section. I'm going to lead a brief discussion with our panelists, but I'd like to invite the audience. I'd like to remind you to please post your own questions in the Q&A, because we do want to get to as many of those as possible. So please don't forget to put questions into the Q&A. So my first question is for Dean Maldonado. You mentioned sort of the West versus as opposed to what I guess we could call the Sor Juana model, and the messaging that each implies. It's not just how we represent it, but how we represent the need for it. And with this idea of an inclusive vision of the core, this balance between sort of the intellectual traditions versus taking on more current political, social, cultural debates. I was wondering if you have any strategies for creating that inclusivity within the structure of the core, without sort of creating like the cameo feel of diversity requirements.
Yeah, thanks. I think if I had figured it out, I would be, I think, look, I mean, some of the things I think about, which is why I mentioned it at the end, is we think about the core in terms of sort of the larger university, or in particular in colleges, but I do think the departmental level is important. So I think that this only works if departments are committed to having a more global, more inclusive understanding of how they present their fields and their disciplines and how they deliver that content. Because I think the pedagogy, the comment that was just made, it's not, it's not just what we teach, it's how we teach it, right? The core. And so to me, I think that we need to put some work into how departments look at their learning outcomes and how they, what they're teaching, what we're teaching our students about the nature of our discipline, about academic authority in our disciplines. For me, I always struggle too. Many of our universities will often kind of reduce populations in the global South to service trips, right? And so any contact that our students will have with, say, Central America is on a service trip to Central America, and they're never encountering any portion of the rich intellectual tradition of the numerous countries in Central America. And so I think we also really have to look at the spaces where we do work in diversity, sometimes quite well. What does it mean, though, in that broader context, if, historically underrepresented students become populations we just serve, right? Instead of learning from in our classrooms. So that's part of the work that I think is important, but I would also love to hear from the other panelists as well.
Yeah, would anyone else like to take up that question? It seems like with departments, sometimes you do have these sort of gated communities of the mind, right? That exist. Ellen?
Yeah, I want to just chime in here and say that, at one point in St. Louis University had what I now think of as the luxury of being able to build a curriculum, not based on something that was, but actually from the ground up. And one of the places where we thought we could make a really big intervention and shift in the way our university thought about including courses devoted to intersectional identity, social justice, dignity, ethics, would be to say that our disciplinary distribution would be that. Like students have to take a course in intersectional identity, a course in what we ended up calling dignity, ethics, and a just society, another one in global interdependence, and that they could. But then we kind of thought, and then one had to be from humanities, another had to be from math, another had to be from natural sciences. What we realized in doing that was there would be people in many departments at our university who would therefore be shut out of teaching for the core. So for instance, a faculty member who's been teaching their course on Shakespeare for the last 35 years, and they're not going to change it. So now, okay, does the course on Shakespeare go away because it's not going to be revised to be filtered through this other way of teaching it. So we backed off from that, but what we ended up doing was saying that there are many places in this core that can accept a kind of, I would say, kind of a thematic overlay of these. We have three areas. One is intersectional or identities and context, global interdependence, and dignity, ethics, and a just society. Courses can count for one or more of those overlays. So you might have a course in the humanities that counts for two of those, plus writing intensive. Those are all 0 credit hour overlays. But what happens is, we know that our colleagues over in the health sciences and engineering desperately want to see courses that count for these areas. So we're seeing a kind of natural progression in many departments towards teaching, if not in really excellent ways in these areas, learning to teach more broadly, inclusively, and diversely because they need to get the students in there. We're also capitalizing on the fact that many of our faculty naturally teach these areas, and now they are in the core in ways they've never been before, including our Women's and Gender Studies program, our American Studies program, and our Women's and Gender Studies program. So, did I say that twice? African American Studies, American Studies, Women's and Gender Studies. So I think that there are ways, kind of piggybacking on what Michelle said, that I think that there are ways to pull this out of the departments, but also incentivize departments to slowly move towards teaching in this way anyway, if they want to capture populations of students that need these kinds of courses.
Yeah, it sounds like a really interesting possibility, and it seems like there's a lot of different creative solutions here. I wanted to bring Ethan in and also point to a question in the chat about writing in the STEM. You mentioned sort of the willingness of faculty members to do exactly the opposite of what we're saying, which is to fall into the comfy confines of our own cloistered perspectives and all of that. And I know that that can be a problem for STEM students with sort of the massive requirements for majors, laboratory time, these 2 credit labs that take up a lot of space and time in their minds. How do you let STEM students know that there are valuable outcomes that they can receive from the core? How do you convince them, that it's not just about sort of ticking off some boxes to meet these requirements?
Yeah, that's obviously a great challenge and a great question that really any major deals with. But you're right, there are many demands in the sciences. I think the way we've tried to intentionally frame it, I can speak mostly about our specific department, Earth and Environmental Sciences, is to really let students know early and often in our classes for majors and also in those core classes that these scientific issues are relevant outside the laboratory. They're relevant to people outside the sciences. And I think making that relevance, drawing those connections early and very intentionally, I think is the best thing that we can do to show that, hey, you've got to learn that broader perspective. You mentioned communication as well. Scientists are often regarded as people that are poor communicators, and that's a fair criticism. And I think to make the kind of progress we need to make as a society in issues related to climate change, sea level rise, displacement of communities, available of water and food and agriculture. These are global issues. These are human issues. And we need to make sure that our students are aware of them. So I think we try to bring that into our classes from the very beginning. Yeah, there's always, a range of interests across the board in terms of where we have to be convincing students more more about one thing over the other. But as I said earlier, I think the more we can bring that content into our upper level classes as well as the core is really valuable. And then really briefly, if I could, just on the previous topic, bringing, I'd say there's two issues: bringing a recognition and an acknowledgement of a more diverse basis of science that's shaped our field today is one challenge. I'll speak to the geosciences specifically, but I think in the sciences in general, that doesn't mean that there haven't been valuable contributions from women, from people of color and underrepresented minorities, but a lot of those contributions have been unintentionally and sometimes intentionally masked or hidden under the auspices of some white man who's taken the credit or the headline for those contributions. And there's an awareness now in our community to be really, there's some work. You've got to go digging for those important first order contributions and then really bring them out, bring them to the forefront. The other challenge in diversity is bringing a more diverse group of students into our courses, into our major. As I mentioned, we have very few students that come in declared for the earth and environmental sciences. The geosciences overall were the least diverse science field, which is problematic and interesting. And I'd say in the last 5 years, there's a great awareness in the geosciences to try to improve that. One of the issues is that there's a lingering mistrust and perception of the geosciences as colonialists who have come into new lands and then raped those lands of their resources and exploited the local communities. This is a reality that still exists in parts of the world, and there's a mistrust there that can keep some students away. But it's also an opportunity for that conversation. How can we improve this? How can we make this different? How can we make those communities part of owning the resources they have, of enjoying the benefits of the resources they have? And so I think by acknowledging some of the history that leaves the geosciences where we are today is the right way to then start to make the next step further in bringing more diverse faces and voices and experiences into that conversation.
Yeah, I'm struck by the idea of sort of course on enduring questions as being part of different cores. And there has been this theme of caring for our common home that's been central to recent issues of conversations in Jesuit Higher Education. And maybe we can talk about this later, Ethan. But of course, STEM courses offer something for the humanities and social science majors as well. I think about a line from the Jetsons, that cartoon staple from the 1980s. I think it was Judy Jetson, the teenage daughter, who said, "Hey, that's grass." I read about that in my ancient history class.
Yeah.
Ecology, climate change, all have very unequal consequences that have much to do with social justice and other questions in our lives. Which brings me to a question for Molly. You said it's less about what we teach and more about how we teach it, and moving through sort of beyond global superficiality towards soul education. And the core animates, I guess the mission animates the core at our universities. And often at Jesuit colleges, theology and philosophy have been sort of at the center of that. How do you balance maintaining that grounding element while avoiding the potential pitfall that those disciplines have some sort of overriding responsibility for the core?
Right. Yeah. Great question. And I think it's something we've all probably had to ask and address and have probably struggled with, because one of the bigger tensions here, and I know Ellen and I talked about this quite a bit previously in our earlier conversations, but how do we manage the number of credits of a core curriculum, creating a truly university core that all of our majors take, meeting the needs, also then balancing with the very, very high credits of many of our professional schools. And Ellen, absolutely, the graph you showed with the numbers of those credits aligns so much, of course, with what we see as well. So for us, it's philosophy and religious studies are still really central parts of the core curriculum. And in fact, in both the second and the third years, that's kind of where students really dig in. to some of those questions. But we also have created broader themes, I guess, and tried to sketch those out, organize the core around those organizing themes and questions, and then ask faculty who are teaching courses in each year to do some kind of what we call sort of horizontal integration around that theme and question. Social justice is one of those overlays, of course, that's very much at the heart of what we do as a Jesuit institution. And we now have engineering courses that also fulfill social justice, for example. We have math courses that are writing enriched. We have nursing courses that talk about global themes. So, you know, I think we're in that way trying to move beyond that kind of traditional canon of here's where the Jesuit piece of the core is and make it really thick throughout the core. What I didn't mention in my comments was the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. And I think we've also been more intentional about educating, especially our new faculty, about that approach to teaching and helping them really understand the Jesuit mission and those kinds of goals, so that they're bringing those sensibilities there again, as I said, not even so much about what we're teaching, but how we're teaching it. And Ethan, I just want to say, when you talked about love, that is exactly right. That's soul education. And I love that you're bringing that into the work you're doing in the sciences.
So one of the challenges that seems to be coming up in the chat, in the Q&A quite a bit, and I'd encourage the panelists to take a look at the Q&A and see if there's anything that they want to, pressing that they want to bring up. But one of the challenges does have to do with the size of a core curriculum, right? How do you impart all of these different aspects of it, you know, sort of create the thickness that you're talking about, without being overly restrictive? And another way to think about this is that there are sort of demographic and structural changes going on in the United States, where students want to take parts of the core elsewhere, right? They want to meet those requirements with summer classes. How do you sort of right size the core, I guess, and make it an asset in student recruitment when you're talking about the university, and sort of how do you turn it to the university's advantage in the larger marketplace of higher education? I mean, this is a question for any of you who wish to go.
Well, I guess I'll just start. Sorry, you know, I think actually our core is probably too large. It's 45 credits, and we've had to work very hard with our professional schools to figure out those overlaps so that there can be a little bit more double counting. Ellen, I think you all have landed right around 30 credits. Is that right?
We're 32 to 35.
Yeah. And I actually did a comprehensive review, one of my last projects as core director, looking across Jesuit institutions at sizes of cores. And when I visited SLU, we also had colleagues there from Milwaukee, and they talked about the core curriculum being much more integrated, so that they had a lot of collaboratively taught courses, historians teaching with English faculty, for example, and students then getting an interdisciplinary approach to a set of humanities questions, but also getting a sense of those disciplines. So moving kind of away from those distribution requirements to a more integrated place of inquiry that can still bring in the expertise of those vital disciplines.
Yeah, other thoughts about this, Ellen?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we did end up 32 to 35 credit hours, and the swing is there because, for instance, our first year seminar can be delivered as a 2 credit hour experience and will be taken that way by students in our professional programs that need that need to keep that number, especially in the first year, down low so that they can get all their prerequisites in. And we have certain things that are 1 credit hour or 0 credit hour, depending on what a student needs. But I think one of the ways we had three approaches. First approach, we made sure that there were things in this core that could not be transferred. So we have our Ignite first year seminar, which is a passion seminar. A faculty can teach on any topic as long as they teach through the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. And it's a way we think with, over the course of the next decade, every single new faculty member will be expected to teach an Ignite seminar, but this will be the way they're invited into learning what it means to teach and learn at a Jesuit institution, which is something that we just don't have. We might have an afternoon where people learn about that, but not an entire, like a 3-part faculty development session on the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm, backward course designing for learning outcomes. We also made sure that no learning outcome, we have 9, and I know that Molly has a different word, but BGMs, sorry, but we have SLOs, student learning outcome. No learning outcome is hit fewer than 3 times at 3 different levels. So we know that even if a student transfers in a number of courses, they are still going to encounter our learning outcomes at our institution. And finally, we have one or two things that you absolutely can't transfer in, but also we ask students to explicitly reflect on the intersection of their core and their major and craft written and oral arguments about what that intersection allows them to see about their own education. And, for students who did go to Jesuit high schools or who did not, who are coming from a Catholic or Christian background or who are not, it doesn't really matter. What we're saying is please reflect on what it means that you became a nurse within a Jesuit undergraduate educational experience. And just that act of reflection and articulation, we hope, fingers crossed, that this will be a way to, even if a student transfers in a lot of this core, to give them a feeling of holistic integration of an undergraduate experience they can talk about once they leave. And I think that over time will be a really powerful argument to make to parents who are wondering whether their students should come to this university as opposed to others, even if they are bringing in a lot of advanced placement credit.
And it's interesting here that how you're sort of focusing on these outcomes, right? And this may be part of what you meant when you were discussing an outcomes-based core curriculum. Ethan, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, just on this topic of the challenge of the numbers of courses, the size of the core curriculum. 2 comments in that regard. I'll come back to the structure we have for these paired classes with different disciplines. I think it's effective in this regard because you can be working on some central topic. We've got one a complex problems course called the Global Implications of Climate Change. It's Earth and Environmental Sciences and Sociology. And by taking that class, you're interested in a topic, perhaps from one side or the other, but you get that relevance. So it helps with that, like, why am I here? Why am I taking this as a sociologist? Why am I taking this as an earth and environmental scientist? You get that relevance baked in. And those courses, both of them count towards that core requirement. So I think it's that structure serves 2 purposes. One is there's a sense of some efficiency in that those courses are going to be counting towards the core, but also build that passion, build that interconnectedness that we're looking for. And then just in perusing the questions, I think, Chris, you were alluding to this earlier on, but the importance of learning how to write and learning how to communicate for STEM students is critical. I think I mentioned this briefly, but we make an effort, certainly at our core level classes, but beyond that as well, to try to bring in training on basic scientific writing. It's sorely needed, and it's something that I think we're intentional about, but that's an area where I think we can be doing even more. We have a new core class with English where that the whole thing is about storytelling and about communicating effectively these earth and environmental science issues. So just a few more thoughts there.
Yeah, that's great. So it strikes me that perhaps one of the reasons that cores can balloon in size has to do with the fact that you have to organize and work with a large faculty body that has different interests. most of which are very legitimate in delivering some part of the course. I was wondering if any of you have any advice on how to organize or work with a large faculty body to ensure that everybody has a voice, to ensure sort of faculty governance and these questions and when you're reimagining a core. Would anyone like to take that one? I know that's a tough one, right? Michelle.
Well, I think just to get the ball start, to get the conversation started, I think a big thing is obviously, it came up in the questions, the turf wars over departments and enrollments, and we sort of have to name the elephant in the room in the conversation. I also, and how many, which departments get how many credits and how that all is distributed and justified. So I think you're trying to balance that with also balancing the fact that certain departments are excluded from the core. So what are you telling our students in those majors? That what in fact they're studying is not significant to students outside. You know what I mean? Like the messaging, when you exclude departments from the core, you're making a statement. You are, whether you like it or not, about what disciplines the university values as essential for every undergraduate studying at that university. And I don't think we speak enough about that, of sort of those excluded from the core, for lack of a better, and why we exclude them. I mean, one could argue that any department, every department at a university should be able to somehow participate in the core, and that students, when you speak on these, preview days and enrollments, you're talk, oh, we have so many majors, we have so many this, we have so many minors, we have all these concentrations, but okay, you only actually have to study some of them, right? It's sort of a mixed messaging. So I think a huge thing, I'm sort of rambling, is part of starting the conversation is making sure all faculty feel heard, and that those faculty that you are excluding from the core, you better have a good reason why, and why you're saying their disciplines are not essential to, in our case, say, a Jesuit liberal arts education. I'll stop there because I saw a hand up, because I'll just stop there.
Thank you. Ellen.
And I think, again, thinking about the luxury that St. Louis University had in developing something from scratch, we began an incredibly intentional university-wide conversation, including these kind of sky's the limit workshops where we invited people from all over the university, and we intentionally put them at tables where they were not with anybody from their disciplinary area or even broad disciplinary bucket, like nobody in the humanities with another humanities person. We had humanities, nursing, occupational therapy, engineering, because faculty don't actually really understand often across campus what one major is dealing with versus another one, both ways. So nursing doesn't understand the extent to which English needs gen ed to survive as a department, because they're not thinking about gen ed in the same way. And English doesn't understand the extent to which if nursing students are asked to do 3 more credit hours, they will go into a 5th year. It's just like, that is a gap. But we built a core. This is almost 100% true. We built a core that ensured any department and any discipline would have a place in this core. There are 2 exceptions. One is that freshman composition is still being taught only by the English department, and that was a battle. But even theology and philosophy requirements can be taught by faculty members in other departments. So we have a healthcare ethics department delivering philosophy classes, political science. We have history faculty delivering religious studies classes. So English is kind of the first year writing is the only place that there's any turf in our core, and there's no foreign language requirement in our core because we couldn't get that through our engineering school. But foreign language has a lot of places where they're participating, including oral and visual communication, the Ignite first year seminar, creative expression. They're doing interdisciplinary seminars at the end. And so, I mean, a goal could be, as a core principle, sorry for the joke, we're going to build a core literally that is not, that does not adhere in department codes, but that adheres in broad areas of inquiry that many, many units can participate in. And if that's a key principle, you're automatically going to see units from all over the campus coming into the core.
Right, and I think that's a really interesting note. Molly, we'll get to you in your response to this question in just a second. But since we only have about 10 minutes left, I want to sort of wrap this up and give each of you a chance to give your concluding thoughts. And here, we oftentimes think about the core as creating a set of skills, right? Survival skills for the 21st century, amassing and sifting through evidence, analyzing the value of competing claims, integrated learning across traditional disciplinary boundaries, the development of tenacity, self-confidence, all of that kind of stuff. But it's not just what we're good at. It's also about what we care about in life, right? There's that aspect of the core as well. And the second component has come up in different ways. In the Q&A, it came up as social, quite a couple of times as social justice questions. Where do you see sort of the place for student-driven research and work here? And whatever other concluding thoughts you might have. And so we'll go with Molly first, then Ethan, then Ellen, and then Michelle.
Just on the previous question about everybody participating in the core, we have our first year seminar and our core integration seminar, and those are two places where pretty much any faculty member can propose a course, and there are also opportunities for faculty to teach collaboratively. So that's been really exciting. What we have also talked to particularly our humanities faculty about, who are seeing and very concerned about declining enrollments, is that, if you can create a really engaging first year seminar, that may become a really important recruiting tool for students to consider, that students may be walking in thinking this is not a discipline that I've considered before, but wow, that was really exciting and really engaging, and I want to know more, right? So that is kind of one way that we I guess address that. That's a big question around agency, and I know in my first year seminar and talking with other faculty, student agency is really kind of at the center of that. So I talked a little bit about creating a community agreement, and part of the focus of that course is helping students make what we refer to as this cultural shift to university intellectual life. And I try to explain to them that the learning belongs to you, right? I mean, this is about you. It's not an education that happens to you. It's an education that you take ownership of. And we kind of talk about that in our first year seminar, but also then look at opportunities for really engaging around that. We also had a group of faculty use the first year seminar and create a kind of student research track. So starting with faculty or students who are freshmen, engaging them in a research-oriented FYS that then would build over time and help students develop those really important inquiry skills, and then even have the opportunity to continue some of that work as they moved forward through the program. So, I think there are lots of creative things we can do here, but absolutely, that message that this is your education. And that's why we framed our core from the student's perspective, that these are questions that we're asking the students to think about and reflect on.
Great, thank you. Ethan.
Yeah, thanks again for this opportunity. I think in earth environmental sciences and in the STEM fields in general, part of our responsibility is to bring awareness of the issues that matter, awareness of the interconnectedness of these issues. Someone mentioned the conversation around care for our common home, the papal encyclical, lots of commentary there about the ways in which we're connected to the environment and our responsibility for the environment. But I also think it's important in terms of student empowerment And I'm always very careful with this with my students in research or in the classroom. I don't want to be telling students what they should find exciting. I don't want to dictate for a student where they should find love, where they should find fulfillment, where they should find meaning. But what I do think is important, especially in the sciences, is to show students what it looks like when a scientist has found love and meaning and fulfillment in what they've discovered. It might be in the rocks of the earth, it might be in the ocean, it might be in climate, it might be in biology. But for a student to see the manifestation of that genuine love and passion and interconnectedness, they now know what it looks like. And they can embark upon finding their own passion, to finding it with a little bit more of a sense of what that end game can look like. And I hope that by forming our students' character that way, that they can go off as scientists that bring that genuine passion from themselves, and allow them to share it and communicate it with the people that need to hear those stories. So that's my final take.
Great, thank you, Ethan. Ellen.
I mean, I think that what Ethan's referring to is kind of cultivating love, or Molly talking about kind of soul teaching. We talk about at SLU as finding ways to, when students first arrive on our campus, to ignite their passion for intellectual enthusiasm through watching another faculty member be deeply passionate and engaged about whatever they are teaching or researching or committed to as activists. And so that intellectual enthusiasm and that commitment is something that we invite students into in the first year. And I think in terms of agency, we want our core to develop expertise in multiple areas, eloquentia perfecta, ways of thinking, multiple disciplinary perspectives, so that when they get into what we kind of has as our capstone seminar, which is a junior level seminar called Collaborative Inquiry, rather than being with majors, we will have a complex question with students from multiple colleges, schools, and majors who are allowed to be experts in that room. So studies show that when students are together with other majors in a discipline, they are far less likely to be expansive and risk-taking in the way they talk about ideas emerging from that discipline. But if you put that student with students from many other majors, they will own the space. They'll say, well, I'm speaking as a biologist or speaking as a philosophy major. And they have room to be more risk-taking and expansive in a room full of students from multiple degree programs in ways that encourage more innovative approaches to, for instance, a senior thesis or an idea for graduate school, or even innovative approaches to problem solving that they might encounter in their next step in a career, for instance, in computing fields or wherever they might go beyond our universities. So intellectual risk-taking and allowing students to become experts is what we're hoping to do with our core.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Michelle?
Well, I guess I really resonate with everything that's been said. And I think I would only add, since I know we're almost out of time, is I think it's so important for us to, when we talk about the agency of our students, to talk to them why it matters, right? Why does it matter to us? Why does it matter to the university that we want you to learn these things and pursue these questions? And I don't always know if we do such a good job, both at the higher level institutionally and in the classroom. And also, I often think about, do we do a good job of integrating the core in the classroom? So we tell students, oh, these aren't just courses that you check off, you check off in a box that you have to kind of do to get out of here. But do we kind of treat our courses as isolated, right? So in essence, they don't see the whole intellectually of what we're trying to do in the core. So I think one way really to try to cultivate more agency in our students is to be more transparent about the rationale behind the core and to try to make more explicit connections. And Ellen, I liked your comments because the students can often do it for us, right? Because in certain core courses, you do see multiple disciplines represented. You see students from across the university, and those are really, they can be wasted opportunities if we don't give a chance for them to have a space to articulate the meaning, right, behind what they're studying or pursuing in this particular course in light of all these other disciplines.
Wonderful. So thank you all so much for this opportunity to think creatively about a shared future in the core curriculum. Just as we have different pasts, we can imagine different sorts of future, and there's no silver bullet formula for what we're talking about it, but does seem to be, I guess, like, I don't know, a golden process of inquiry, one that reminds us of the value of reflection and of listening, one that reminds us that inventiveness and innovation require imagination and agility and enthusiasm, and one that reminds us that we share many of the same challenges, and in talking about them and sharing information at events like this, maybe we can come across, in some cases stumble, in some cases be pulled across the finish line, in some cases actually find important insights, whether it's about social justice, critical thinking, embracing transparency, and enthusiasm, and thinking about the core. And it's been wonderful from my perspective to watch these insights, and it offers a lot of hope that we can sort of approach something that looks like completeness in what's a necessarily incomplete world of higher education. So thank you, Molly, Ellen, Ethan, Michelle. Thanks, Jim, for hosting us. Thanks to the seminar on Jesuit Higher Education, and thank you everyone for attending. It's really been a wonderful time. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day, rest of the week, and congrats on the end of the semester. Take care.